So in this lesson, we're going to continue with order of operations. We're going to do more of them, but today they will involve parentheses and other grouping symbols in our numerical expressions. In the learning target, I can recognize them when numbers and operations are grouped as one term in a numerical expression so that I can simplify those expressions following the proper order of operations. You know, I got it when I score 100% on the assignment following the lesson. So we're going to talk about what we call grouping symbols, and that would be a grouping symbol in math that we use to group numbers and operations together are parentheses, which are these curved symbols right here, or brackets, which are squared off parentheses. We just have square corners on those parentheses, and they call those brackets. And we put those around math problems to form a group. So it's important when we're doing order of operations to remember that in our last lesson, we were identifying the terms and then what we had to decide to do with those terms once we've identified them. And some of them were just numbers, so we left them alone, and others had to be simplified. There was a computation that we had to do, and we would simplify that term by performing that computation. And then once we had all numbers left, we would add or subtract those numbers to simplify. So in this, we have, we're going to do the same process. So when expressions are inside parentheses, it's important to recognize, or inside brackets, it's important to recognize that this is a group, and that group is its own term. Its own term. A way to describe it is a nested term. We'll use that word. This is a nested term. So the term is nested. We did actually have some nested terms in the last lesson, but I didn't refer to them as that. So we're going to call them nested today. So we're looking at example 1, and we just want to identify terms again. We want to practice it, and we're going to practice looking at when we have the grouping symbols, how to identify those terms. So we're going to start here. We can notice the pluses and minuses. I'm going to highlight those, but notice I did not. I skipped the one inside the parentheses because that is not going to be an addition or subtraction we highlight when they're in parentheses. Okay, that is considered a group, and it's considered its own term. So we're not going to split it up into 7 and 4. We're going to leave it lumped together because it's got parentheses around it. And so that makes it its own term. So that's a little bit complicated because of what we did yesterday, but just know when it's inside parentheses and there's a plus or a minus, you do not highlight it because this is a nested term is what it's called. So it's grouped as its own term. So we have 3 terms. We have 8. We have the quantity 7 minus 4. That's how we read that when it's in parentheses. The quantity 7 minus 4. And then we have the term 2. Okay? When you look at this one, it looks kind of complicated because we have parentheses twice. So we have to figure out the terms. So we're going to highlight the minus. We're going to leave these pluses alone because they're nested terms. They're inside those parentheses. It's a nested term. The parentheses around that plus addition problem make that one term and this one term. So we have 3 times the quantity 2 plus 6. This is one term. And then 7 plus 3, this is one term. So there are only 2 terms in this expression. 1 minus sign outside those parentheses, and then 2 terms. So it looks complicated, but if we identify the terms, simplifying it is going to be a lot easier in a little bit. Okay, so we're going to look at this expression right here, and we're going to circle the terms. Well, we've got the minus sign here and the plus sign here. Since that's a nested group here with the parentheses around it, we're going to leave that unhighlighted. That is not going to be highlighted. So in my brain, I'm saying I got this one and this one, which means this is a term. This is its own term. It's grouped with that parenthesis, and this is a term. Now I'm going to work left to right. I'm going to simplify left to right, hitting one term at a time. Well, the 24 is already in its simplest form. I bring the minus sign down, And now this nested term needs to be simplified. 6 plus 8, that's 14. And then the plus sign just comes down and the 5 is already in simplest form. So now my terms are all in their simplest form. They're just numbers. I'm going to work left to right. 24 take away 14 is my first operation here. And that's 10. And I'm just going to bring down the plus 5. We do one operation at a time. 10 plus 5 is 15. So by doing that one operation at a time, working our way down to get from 3 terms down to 1 term, it just helps us to stay organized and avoid those careless errors and keeps our accuracy on point. So this next one, I want you to circle the terms after you pause the video. Circle each term and then turn it back on to make sure you are identifying terms correctly before you do any math. So pause the video, circle the terms, and then we'll go from there. All right, so I did notice that I had 2 groups here, and that becomes its own term together. The parentheses with what's inside make one term. And so I circled that up, and I circled the 7 minus 3 up, and this 2 was all by itself. So now that I have that, I'm going to take care of the nested terms, the ones that have this operation inside those parentheses. The 2 comes down. I'm not doing anything with that yet, and I'm doing 6 plus 4 is 10, and 7 take away 3 is 4. Okay, now from there, we're going to add left to right, one operation at a time. 10 plus 2 is 12. Bring down the plus 4 because we haven't done it yet. And then 12 plus 4 is 16. So in that funneling process, we went from 3 terms down to 1 term. So we evaluated or simplified the numerical expressions. We did the math in the right form, performing the operations in the right order. All right, now we are looking at this next piece, and we are getting to check out some expressions here. And when we look at these expressions, they're getting a little more complicated. So we just have to make sure we are taking our time and identifying the terms appropriately. And once we've identified them, we're going to need to have a plan on how to handle those nested groups, those nested terms. Okay, and the nested terms are what we're going to use to stay organized as we get more complicated is the same step, circle the terms, and then simplify left to right, one operation at a time. And we might need to use a checklist because we're going to have a few operations to handle on each term. So we might need a checklist. When you have nested terms, that means you have parentheses around a group, or you have more than one operation going on in a term, then you need to slow it down a bit and you need to check yourself. So here was our example, 3 times the quantity 4 plus 6 minus 2 times 3 squared. So when we read that across, this is the only minus sign in our problem that we're going to highlight because this plus sign right here is in parentheses. So it's its own term right here. This term has 2 operations in it. It's got adding and multiplying. So that's why this gets a little more tricky. This also has 2 operations. It's got exponents right here and multiplication. So it's a little more tricky. It gets a little more complicated. So we have to slow it down. So I circled this term and I circled this term. Now we simply do the math on each of those terms. This one says that we have 3 times the quantity 4 plus 6. I have 2 things to do. I got to multiply and add. So we're going to come over to our checklist. The checklist tells us what order to do these 2 operations in. We start at the top, and this is our first check. Do we have grouping symbols? This is the thing we look for first on that nested term. Yes, we have parentheses, so we do what's in the grouping symbols first. 4 plus 6. We do that first, it's right there. We bring the 3 down. Remember, when I have 3 next to parentheses and no symbol in between, that means to multiply. So this is 3 times 10. So since grouping symbols is first on our checklist, that's the first thing we look for to clear up in our math. Now I'm going to come over to this term because I got this one operation done on it. Bring my minus down. Now I have 2 times 3 squared. So I look at this nested term. It's got 2 operations, multiplication and exponents. I go over to my checklist, multiplication and exponents. Well, there's no grouping symbol on this term, so I check that off. I don't need to do step 1. Now the next thing I look for is exponents. That's the next thing I would do. And I have exponents. It's right here. So I need to do that. And right here I have a little typo, so I'm going to fix that up. I'm going to cross this out. Your sheet should be correct. Cross that out. It needs to be darker. Sorry about that. I didn't realize I didn't fix it here. So we're going to cross that out. And I'm going to write 2 on a thinner so you can read it. I'm going to write 2 times 9 here because I'm doing the exponents first. Exponents is my above the multiply piece. So I do my exponents before I multiply. And remember, 3 squared is 3 times 3, which is 9. It's not 3 times 2. It's not 6. It's 3 times 3 exponents. We did that in our last unit, last lesson. 3 times 3 is 9. So the 2 comes down because I haven't multiplied by it yet, times 9. So I did the plus here and I did the squared here and I cleaned those 2 terms up. But I'm not done. I still have more to clean up. If you look, you have this term now and this term now, and they're not just numbers yet. We got to multiply. 3 times 10 is 30. Left to right, 2 times 9 is 18. Now I can subtract because I'm down to 2 numbers. So I just 30 minus 18 is 12. So when you have more than one operation in your term, you go to the checklist, you start at the top, you look for grouping symbols like parentheses or brackets, and you do the math in the grouping symbols. Once that's done, you check for exponents. If there's no exponents, you multiply. So here was first add, then multiply by 3. On this expression, there were no grouping symbols, but we had an exponent, so we did that, got 9, and then underneath was multiply. That was next. We got 18, and then we subtract 30 minus 18, and we're done. Okay, so the checklist is going to be important. All right, so we're going to need to use the checklist for these examples to simplify the terms because they have more than one operation. They're nested. This has multiplication here, and it's got exponents as well. So when I'm looking at this, I go over to my checklist. This is one term. It's one term, but it's got 2 operations going on. So we got to go in the right order or we're not going to get the right answer. Are there grouping symbols? I'm going to the checklist. The first thing you look for are grouping symbols. There are no grouping symbols, so I'm checking that off my list. The next thing I look for, are there exponents? There are right here. So I'm going to do the exponents. Remember, that's 4 times 4. Not 4 times 2, it's 4 times 4, which is 16. So the 3 comes down because I haven't done that yet. And I squared 4 and I got 16. Check, exponents are all gone. Now I just have a multiplication problem right here. So I'm going to multiply 3 times 16. If you need to do the vertical math, you come off to the side and you work it out. 6 times 3 is 18. I carry the 1 and the 8 goes down here. 8 times 3 is 1 plus 1 is 4. So 3 times 16 is 48. All right, let's see what happens over here because I have 3, I have a times, and I have a 4, and I have a squared. Let's see if we get the same answer. This, though, has parentheses around the 3 and the 4. So when I come over here, because I have 2 operations, it's one term with 2 operations, I'm going to go to my checklist because that gets a little more complicated. So I want to make sure I'm going in the right order, so I use my checklist. Sorry, trying to get my pen. Okay, so the checklist is over here. First thing I'm going to look for is grouping symbols, and I have them. So I do what's inside the grouping symbols first. What is 3 times 4? That's 12. And once I do what's inside the parentheses, I tend to drop them. I don't need them anymore. I did the operation that was inside, that grouped, and then up here I have a squared. So I have 12 squared. Remember, 12 squared is not 24. It's not 12 times 2. It's 12 times itself. And 12 times 12 is one of those facts you should have memorized in your head. 3 seconds or less, you'd be able to say 144. If you can't say that, you got to memorize that one. 12 times 12 is 144. Okay, so we did not get the same answer here and here. They did not come out the same. So these grouping symbols forced us to do the multiplication first because we were squaring 3 times 4. We were squaring 12 here. Here, we did exponents first. There were no parentheses, so we went to the E, and it said to do 4 squared, which is 16. Here we squared 12. Here we squared 16. And we tripled 16 here and got 48. We squared 12 here and got 144. So nope, the parentheses make a difference. So you got to pay attention and use your checklist and follow it through when there's more than one operation in your term. This is a single term right here. 16 divided by 2 squared. There's no plus or minuses in this thing, so this is one term. And I'm looking at it. I got a 16 divided by 2 squared. I got to go to the checklist because there's 2 operations. I need to make sure I go in the right order so I get the right answer. If I do it out of order, there's a really good chance I'm not going to get the right answer. So it's division and exponents. Those are the 2 operations I'm looking at. So I go up here. I have no grouping symbols. There's no parentheses. I do have exponents. That's the second thing I check. So I'm going to do the exponents before I divide. Exponents before you divide. 2 squared is 4. 2 times 2. I haven't done the 16 divided by yet because it's lower on the list. It's down here. It's after exponents. We divide after exponents. 16 divided by 4 is 4. And it's the only thing left, so you know to do it last. Exponents before division. Looking at our checklist when we have a term with more than one operation, a nested term. This one changes it up a bit. Threw the grouping symbols in. So that makes things on my checklist. Checklist isn't going to change order. We go in the same order. So we're going to look for the grouping symbols. That's first. Since it has it, we're going to divide before we do the exponent. 16 divided by 2 is 8. And then we have the squared. Once I do the division inside those parentheses, I can drop them. 8 squared, that's not 8 times 2. It's not 16. It's 8 times 8, which is 64. So when there's more than one operation in our terms that we have to simplify and simplify again, it's important you go over to this checklist to make sure you do the correct operation by priority. Grouping is first, then exponents. Okay, and then whatever's left, you will clean up, like a multiplication or division could be left, or there could be addition or subtraction left. In this case, it was just 2 operations. All right, so we're going to do some practicing, and we're going to be having to work neat and organized in rows like we've been doing all along. That's the required work that we need to see you showing you learned today. And we're going to follow the plan. We're going to stick to the plan. We're going to first identify our terms. Once we identify the terms, we're going to simplify the expressions one operation at a time. If a term has more than one operation, it's nested, then we're going to use the checklist to help us go in the correct order, because that's where it gets dicey. We have a specific order once we are cleaning up those terms. So we're going to start with this one. The first thing I want you to do is to make sure you understand how to identify the terms. So you're going to pause the video. You're going to circle what you think the terms are, and then you're going to turn the video back on to see if you circled the right pieces. All right, so when you look at this, it's 3 times 2 squared. There's a term. Here's your minus, because the terms are in between those minuses and pluses. And then the next term is 2 times the quantity, 3 plus 1. Okay, remember those parentheses around an addition or subtraction make that its own piece of a term. Since the 2 is in front, it's 2 times 3 plus 1. That is also part of that term. So this expression has 2 terms in it. They're a little complicated because there's a lot happening in each of these expressions. In this piece right here, we have 2 operations, multiplication and exponents. In this term right here, we also have 2 operations, multiplication 2 times, and then addition. So we're going to need to follow the checklist to make sure we do these in the right order. So I need to start cleaning up this one right here. I have to multiply or exponents. Go to the checklist. We have exponents, and that's before multiplication. So I'm going to go 3 times 2 squared. I'm going to take care of the 2 squared. So it's 3 times 4, exponents first. And then I'm going to say minus. And then this next one is 2 times the quantity, 3 plus 1. So I'm going to go to the checklist. And there are grouping symbols. There's parentheses. I'm going to do the addition inside that first. 2 times, because I'm going to do the addition, I can drop the parentheses and just say 4. 3 plus 1 is 4. Okay, so what I did first there, I'm just going to highlight it to make sure you're understanding, is my checklist said that I need to do exponents before multiplication here, and I need to do grouping symbols before multiplication here. Both were above multiplication. It was below. So I did my exponents, and I got 3 times 4. Now I can do that math. That's 12. 3 times 4 is 12. I got to clean that term up still. I'm not done. Minus 2 times 4, I got to multiply that, is 8. Now I do 12, take away 8 is 4. All right, so that is how we funnel when we have a little more complicated terms going on. We can still funnel, we just have to follow the checklist. Stick with this plan, but when you're getting terms with more than one operation, use the checklist to decide which one to do first and which one to do second. This example, I want you to pause the video. I want you to circle each term and then turn the video back on to see if you found each term correctly. All right, so this is the term, this first term 30 right here stands alone. It's in its simplest form. Then we have the minus sign, and inside the parentheses we have 2 plus 3 and then the exponent. Since the plus is inside those parentheses, that is considered a term. So we circle the whole thing because it's lumped together. So quantity 2 plus 3 squared is its own term. And then we have a plus sign followed by 2 times 8 divided by 4. 2 times 8 divided by 4 is its own term. So this is 3 terms. That's all it is, 3 terms. We got to simplify each one. This one's done, so we're just going to bring it down. This one next one has some work. It's got 2 operations. It's got addition and squaring. All right, so we go up to the checklist. When you look at the checklist, start at the top. Are there parentheses? Grouping symbols? Yes. Do what's inside. 2 plus 3 is 5. And then we square that because we haven't done the exponent yet. We had to do grouping first. So we took care of this first, and this is coming down. Plus, now this one has multiplication and division. When we have both in the same term, multiplication and division, we just work the expression left to right. Left to right. So we go 2 times 8 is 16. And I'm just doing one operation at a time. I'm writing the divide 4 down. I haven't done it yet. I've just done the 2 plus 8. Okay, so now we're going to come down and we have this as a number. This term is not simplified yet. We have to keep going on that, and this term is not simplified yet. So we can't do our subtraction and addition yet until we turn these into single numbers. All right, so 30 is still 30. Hasn't changed. We haven't used it yet. minus 5 squared. Remember, that's 5 times itself. Nah, all right, 5 times itself. So that's 25. It's not 10, it's 25. And then 16 divided by 4 is 4. So we do the division. Now I've got 3 numbers. I can just subtract and add left to right. 30 minus 25 is 5. 5 plus 4, bring it down. 5 plus 4 is 9. Okay, so it's a pretty complicated looking problem, but if you circle the terms and clean up each term till they're actual numbers instead of math problems that have operations in them, then you just work left to right to simplify it out. All right, so I am going to have you do this problem on your own. Circle the terms first, because that's important to identify what has to be cleaned up before we can add or subtract. Okay, so use the checklist if there's a term with more than one operation needs to in order to clean it up. So you're going to do this one, pause the video, turn it on to see if you got it right. Okay, so in this one, our 2 terms are this division problem right here, 5 squared divided by 3 plus 2, and the 8. Those are the 2 terms in this problem. I know we see a plus sign down here, and we were talking about highlighting the pluses to identify the terms, but this is a nested, right here, term. This belongs to this division setup, okay? A fraction bar is like a grouping symbol. It says numerator, denominator, separate groups, but together because they're in a division situation, they are one term. And then plus 8. So now we're going to go 5 squared. That's 25, and 3 plus 2 is 5. So we've rewritten this division problem as 25 divided by 5 plus 8. Now we do the division. 25 divided by 5 is 5 plus 8, and 5 plus 8 is 13. So we had to clean up this term completely before we could add the 8 to it. Okay, you're going to try this next one on your own. You're going to pause the video, circle the terms, and then clean up each term, and then finally subtract when you're done. Turn it on to see if you've got it, the video, when you're done working it through. Okay, so you should have circled 2 times 4 squared. And you should have circled 27 over 3, 27 divided by 3 times 2. The minus sign separates those 2 terms. When you see this term, it's multiplication here by 2 and exponents. Well, exponents comes before your multiplication. So we're going to do 4 squared. 4 times 4 is 16. Make sure you didn't put 8 here. It's 4 times 4 is 16. And the 2 comes down in front. I dropped the parentheses here and put a times sign in between. 2 times 16. On this term, it's division and multiplication. And we work the division and multiplication problems left to right. So division is first here. It came first. 27 divided by 3 is 9. So I bring the times 2 down because I'm going to do that second, left to right. 2 times 16 is 32, minus 9 times 2 is 18. So we just work those 2 terms out. And now we get to subtract those 2 terms. 32 minus 18 is 14. And that's it. So what we did today was we kind of got really into our 6th grade order of op standards by giving you more complex numerical expressions. We gave you those nested terms where there's more than one operation to get that term to become a number in simplest form. And then once you are able to get those nested terms into single numbers, you could then add or subtract them in the end to get your final answer working left to right. It's important, again, for the nested to keep that checklist in front of you and to keep practicing. You have to know the checklist, the order. Grouping symbols always come before exponents. Then exponents always come before multiplication and division. And then addition and subtraction are last. Okay, multiplication and division, addition and subtraction, when they're in terms, we work left to right. So you have to know that checklist, so make sure you get that order in your head. And on those nested ones, you write that checklist down and walk yourself through it to keep yourself organized and on point. All right, good luck on your assignment.